songs we sang, I was low key blown because I'm like, I don't want to sing these songs. And then like young adult nights, forget it. We were all in,
So you had to memorize songs every week just to sing them.
Well, thank God, like, cause it was me and I was
Yeah.
yeah, it was me and Christian. Like, so he would do one Sunday and I would do like we would alternate. So I wouldn't have to do it every week. So it helped, but like obviously he's been at this church way longer than I am.
Right.
So he knew all the songs and he understood what he was singing. But for me, yeah, I'd be like, man, I gotta practice all week, memorize these.
Memorize. So if y'all had like so much for the Holy Spirit leading you, bro, because you had to know what song, you had to know that song. That would be something if you started singing in Spanish and you don't know that joint, and they'd be like,
yeah, but see, now I would feel the pressure of like, okay, I'm singing in Spanish. Like some of these songs, sure I know, but like if I'm trying to go off a tangent, and I feel
right,
like do something else, I'll do it in English. So I'll be like, forget
that's crazy, bro.
I'm not trying to like.
And I remember I visited that church when you were still there.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, Wadi took me one time.
Oh.
Yeah, you had a buddy of yours that rapped.
Reggie.
Yeah. So I wanted to connect with him because he knew like people who made beats and stuff like that.
No, that was Brian.
Brian, light skin guy. Yeah. You used to have short hair back in the day too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Are you still reading that Exodus joint? You still making that point?
Well, I was thinking of something else because I was thinking of a counterpoint to the point that I was making.
So a counterpoint to the Exodus 21 joint?
Yeah, the counterpoint is God did permit Israel to take captives.
He did, right?
I was trying to read. It's in Deuteronomy. He gave laws around it, so I was trying to figure out how could I disprove that counterpoint of God allowing them to breed to have slaves, right?
Right.
But it's still different.
But even if you, but that's where even if you say that God in the Old Testament allowed for Israel to have some slaves, right? Based on conquest, which was there. There was still a way that you had to treat those slaves, though.
Yeah.
Like even if you believe that the Old Testament was saying you in the church in the New can own slaves, you were still accountable for how you treated them slaves, though.
Yeah.
Are you reading? Is it saying you can?
Yes, but I think I found it. So the cities you could enslave were those that submit to you.
Right.
So if they willingly, so before they went to war, I just read it. It says, when you draw near to
what is this?
This Deuteronomy 20, starting in verse 10. When you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it. And if it responds to you peaceably and opens up to you, then all the people who you find in it shall do forced labor for you and shall serve you.
Right.
That's people who willingly submitted, which I think, I guess the point that I'm trying to establish is slavery was always, acceptable slavery was voluntary and it had to be willingly submitted to, at least in from God's perspective. That's where it gets tricky. When it gets to 12, it says, but if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. It says, and when the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall put all the males to death. Every male had to die, but the women and the little ones and the livestock and everything else would be spoils to you. It doesn't say slaves though. If you could take the women and the children and the livestock.
But here's the other challenge with Old Testament Israel, right?
That's right.
You had the concept of the year of Jubilee, right? Mm-hmm. So you had the year of Jubilee every 50 years, and then you had the sabbatical year every 7th year. Everybody was like, go home to their whatever, right? So in Jubilee, every 50 years, everyone was free. Debts were canceled, all of it, right? So even if you're in America in the 15th, 1600s, right? And you're a Christian and you can justify in your mind slaves. Let's say you can justify because you're reading the New Testament, you're saying that, right? Or you're using the Old Testament as that. What about the year of Jubilee? What about the sabbatical every 7 years? So 50 years from now, you got to let all those slaves go. The debt is canceled, right? That's what I'm talking about. Like that never happened. So even if America could justify chattel slavery from the Bible, you still have qualifications that you've broken. Right? You still have qualification. And the reason why those requirements are there is because loving your neighbor as yourself was a part of, I mean, you think about the 10 commandments, right? The first 3 commandments are about loving God. The 4th commandment is really about for people, it's like self-care, right? The sabbatical. And then the last 6 are loving your neighbor. You honor your mother and father. Do not fault. The rest of them are. So even if you had slaves, you still had to submit to the 10 commandments, right? So isn't slavery wanting that slave? Isn't that coveting?
Yeah.
Isn't that coveting your neighbor, right? I want the slave, or you know what I'm saying? So again, I just think you cannot violate the second greatest commandment and not think there are consequences.
Well, and what I was thinking too is the context in which that was written. Like they're about to go into
war,
the promised land,
right?
War, holy war. You see what I'm saying? There's
right.
more than, so why would we take that in the 17th, 18th century and apply it as if it's the same thing? It wasn't the same thing. You know what I'm saying? Those people who brought slaves to America, they were not in that context.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So for them to try to take those laws and then apply it, to me, doesn't even make any sense.
Because it wasn't war, right? It wasn't even about war, and it wasn't promised land. Right. But if you think America's the promised land, if you have a manifest destiny that God is in America the promised land, then you have justification for it.
Yeah, I think the strongest evidence, just going back to Exodus 21:16, against any forced or coerced slavery, is just that, like, if you steal a man and sell him, anyone found in possession of him,
100%.
That's chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is not in the context of war, what you're talking about. This is the exchange or the purchasing of men and women who have been taken captive against their will, which I think God's heart, even in the Old Testament, consistent with the New Testament, that was something that he did not.
Right.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And so you just have a problem. But again, this is why I never understood the defense of, like, it's going to be interesting to see who actually makes it to heaven. You know what I'm saying? Like I remember when all this stuff was coming out, like when Black Christians were pushing back against white Christians, first, before you were woke, before it was a social justice warrior. That's what you were at first, right? Yeah. Before that, I remember people like theologians, like popular white Christian theologians, were saying stuff like, man, I guess we can't look at David as a good king either, because he sinned with Bathsheba, and so everyone's now calling out all these sins from the past, and so I guess we just can't. And I remember thinking about that and thinking, like, fam, this is what I mean. Like, you're missing the point. Yeah. David did not teach that people should take other people's wives, have sex with them, and then commit them and then have them murdered. You're talking about sin that David committed versus theology that people taught other people was okay to do. That's a big difference, though. There's a difference between David.
And David accepted his consequences.
100%, right? David accepted it, right? Yeah, he was right. So again, I think that's the disconnect to me with American Christianity. And you defend men of the past. Like, as long as you have good theology, you think like, oh, or if you agree with their theology, then you think, like, how, you know.
Yeah.
But it's like, man, in Matthew 23, Jesus said, look, the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So observe what they tell you, but don't imitate what they do. To me, that's crazy. That means the Lord is saying God is going to continue to use these men because they understand the law. So listen to them, but don't be like them. So these people are not qualified by God, right, for eternity, but he's still going to use them to get his word out because these are the people that know the word. That's insane to me. So you gotta be careful, fam. because God can use you to teach the Bible, and when you stand before Him, you get no reward. You don't even get eternity for it.
Sounds like Paul in what is it, Philippians, where he said they're preaching the gospel with the wrong motivation.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But, hey, as long as they're preaching the gospel,
I'm good.
with me.
As long as they're preaching the gospel, like I'm good with that. That's all he cared about, right? And I think that's the challenge here. Hello. Yeah. Where are you? Okay, great. You're the okay, great. Can you get the door?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, you want me to get the door?
Yeah, it's there. No, I just think a lot of this stuff, bro, is just open the door. The piece is there. And just sign the thing for him. Front door. No, I just think a lot of that stuff is just crazy to me. And I think the justification for some of these things is just dumb. Yeah. Right? I don't know how you come up with this kind of perspective when you have a clear violation of God's word, but then you're making excuses for those who disobey it. But then in the modern era, you're offended at Christians who do things like, so if you're a man of your times, okay, let's just say all the slave owners were men of their times, then all the people who agree with abortion today are men of their times. Right? They weren't having abortions back then. All the people who agree with drugs are men of their times. Right? So that's the problem that I think is happening with all of this. You can't justify it. Right. And I forgot about that Exodus 21. That's actually a good passage. But this conversation doesn't happen anymore because you're woke. Like if you talk about this stuff anymore, people just can't, they just get offended. And I don't know. It's interesting because when you look at the past, right? Everyone's like, oh, they're always bringing up the past. Like when you stand before God, you're giving an account for your past.
Yeah. Also, wouldn't this be a conversation that woke people will want to have? Like, so often the Bible is made to be a resource for proving slavery being fine in God's eyes.
Right.
But wouldn't having this conversation around Exodus 21 be a relief?
For maybe the woke people, but the anti-woke, anti-social justice warrior gospel crowd, then that they probably don't. You just get labeled as woke and they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to me because when you say stuff like you are like thinking about history, like we celebrate what is July 4th, right? That's history. Like we celebrate history. The Christian faith is historical. Like we celebrate history. Like we have to. So on one level, it's like you cherry pick what history you think you can have, and then the rest of it you just disagree with, which I don't get. I don't understand it. I don't get it at all.
Sorry, my bad.
Now you got to let JP get his.
I mean, what you brought up from the passage that you brought up earlier is really just like an indictment. Like the American church, they've replaced the Pharisees of old, who have good orthodoxy but weak orthopraxy, and then they also become hypocrites because they pick and choose what they want to apply.
100%.
We can't have conversations around Exodus 21:16 because now you got to go and look at what your dad did, and if the things that he did that was wrong, you can't just point to him and say he was a man of his time. Now he was categorically wrong.
But again, I think conservatives / white America, I think they can also they just have sort of a short memory because like even when you talk about like the fatherlessness in the Black community, right? You can say like, hey, okay, that's the biggest threat to the fatherlessness in the home, right? And it's okay. At what point do you use that criteria as the evaluation for a community? Because if that's true, that fatherlessness in the Black community is the main problem, then how do you account for all of the fathers in the white community who transferred slavery and all these evil ethics down to their children, right? So if fatherlessness is the problem, the lack of fathers, and what do you say to all the fathers that were around for hundreds of years that taught their children
Ooh.
how to be evil,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So why is fatherlessness the problem in the black community? Then I would say, well, shoot, the fatherhood was the problem in American history, right? We don't have that conversation. You see what I'm saying? So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there's not fatherlessness in the black community that's real, but if you're going to have the conversation that fatherlessness in the black community is the biggest problem, then fatherhood in the white community has been the decadence of American history.
And maybe that's why there's such
Right?
a fight. You're right. And maybe that's why there's such a fight not to acknowledge slavery as being wrong. Because if you have to now acknowledge
Then
slavery,
you got to acknowledge that.
You got to acknowledge that
Right.
your fathers perpetuated.
100%. And that's the problem. So, man, don't call it woke. Just have an honest conversation. Just like this is what I think is happening. And this is why, like I was saying this earlier, America, where we are right now as a country, is not due to democratic policies. It's due to reaping what you've sown. You cannot violate people and then make excuses for some people and not others, call good evil and evil good, and then expect there to be no lingering consequences for it. Like even the idea, and I get it, yes, black people right now, we're prone to violence, and that's how people see it, prone to violence and criminality. But again, how long do you evaluate that? At what point does that evaluation begin? In the 80s and the 70s? If you look at American history, black people submitted to slavery and then to Jim Crow for a total of 300 and something years of America's 400 plus year history. So if we're prone to violence and criminality, then where was all the violence in all the slave revolts and all of that? If you look at American history, whose ethnicity has been prone to violence and criminality? It's been white men, right?
Yeah.
So again, that's what I mean. Like if you're going, but it's woke. If you bring that up, it's like, nah. You think if God told, Jesus said the Ninevites are going to rise up and judge this generation.
Yeah.
Sodom and Gomorrah is going to rise up and judge this generation, right? Jesus said the past will judge you. Then why do we think the past won't do the same for us?
Wow.
I don't get it. And I just think, I do get it, but I just think when I say that, I'm being more as a rhetorical device. I think this is why I just don't agree with, I just don't trust any of them. I think you're not being realistic. You're lying and you lack integrity, because if you have integrity, you can at least acknowledge, hey, this was wrong and this is wrong. Yeah. I think the black community that is associated with violence and is wrong and evil. And when they stand before God, they're going to give an account, and you cannot blame slavery, Jim Crow, or that. You can't blame that. Yeah. But you also can't be like, oh, the only reason why they're in this predicament is because of democratic policies. Yeah. You cannot say that. You cannot ignore the lingering. Listen, if a woman were to get sexually assaulted, right? Like imagine, okay, one of your wives. Imagine your wives call you and she was assaulted, right? You're distraught, right? Your wife's affected. You go to the hospital, you do all the stuff you got to do. You follow police report, right? And all of that is happening. And your wife is now terrified. She is afraid to go out at night. She is afraid day or night if she sees a man approaching her. Say she goes to the grocery store and she's all fumbling and she's afraid. There's a traumatic imprint left on her because she's experienced that situation. Imagine someone coming to your wife and saying, hey, listen, I know what happened to you was bad, but you can't. Look, every man is not a rapist, okay? Your brother's not, your husband's not. You're the school bus driver. You need to get over this, right? What would you say? You would be offended, 100%, right? You would be offended, and you would probably sin against the Lord and them, because you would want to because one, it would be insensitive. Two, you're putting the blame on your spouse, your wife, for reacting to this trauma and saying that. That's exactly what many Black people feel like in America. You've been allowed to, and then you watch the Jews get reparations, right? The Jews, they have a war tribunal, fam. In 1945, was it 40? There was a war tribunal where Hitler's top 22 lieutenants And America was one of the 5 judges that indicted these men at a time where you allowed for heinous crimes against women, black people, and so forth. You had no right to be on that jury. You give those people billions of dollars in restitution. You don't call it reparations, but that's what it was. It was, we're going to pay you a ton of money for what happened to you in the Holocaust, and then tell all these people, well, you're just being woke because you should, it's your community's your fault. So we changed the laws, but we didn't say, hey, because we redlined your communities, we're going to now build new communities for you to move into and make sure you have access to all of the property rights and all of the schooling and things that bring money into your community. We're going to change that to right. You didn't do that. I mean, let's keep it 100, right? Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, landmark decision. Everyone says that, right? That was the desegregation of schools, right? Let's talk about the implementation. How did that get implemented? You took a couple of black students and let them go to white schools. They were traumatized by, they had to go in by National Guard, right? Just to not be attacked. You let white parents who hated that start charter and private schools so they wouldn't have to integrate, right? And that was what, and you called that landmark legislation. Now, maybe the legislation was good, but the implementation was terrible. Why didn't you take white students and bus them to black schools and take black students and bus them to white schools? So the white students would be like, wow, look at these school books. Look at these conditions. You didn't do that. You didn't integrate schools. You let a few black people come to white schools and be traumatized, and you call that landmark decision. And we're supposed to celebrate that when the implementation of it was traumatic. That's the stuff I'm talking about. So like, if we're just, and I'm not trying to be, it's just being honest. This is honest fact. I've studied, this is honest fact. This is what happened. I get it. That wasn't, my point is there are lingering consequences for that. I'm not even talking about from people. God says, do not be deceived. God cannot be not. You will reap what you sow. And so I think what America is facing right now is not socialism or Marxism. It's Godism. I think there is a reaping what you've sown element to America that's happening right now.
Yeah.
And you can call me woke. I'll call you asleep. No matter what you say, that's just truth. You can't take that away.
Yeah.
You can't take it away. And that's the problem with America. And I think some people are trying to force this stuff. Some people want vengeance. And then there are other people who just want to ignore the consequences of the past. And here we are.
Did we all get the same thing essentially?
No, I didn't.
Okay, what'd you get?
Mine was, I think everyone else's was, I don't know what you got. I got, how many other is it? Is it 4 or 3?
1, 2, 3, 4 boxes.
So all 3 of them are the same. There's green peppers on yours.
Yeah.
And one of mine is sausage only.
Oh, okay.
So you got 1 pie for everybody?
No, I got 4. There's 3. So everyone's got like so there's 3 pies for you 4.
Wow.
3, 2.5.
There you go.
So you're gonna eat good, bro. That's what I'm saying. You're gonna eat good. He got that gleam in his eye. Look, you're gonna eat good. Look, you got look, and this. Oh, hey, Vava, can you bring us some plates?